The stagecoach bucked, its wheels finding purchase on the last rise of the wash. The timber groaned, a sound lost beneath the steady complaint of the wind. Outside, the world was burned red. Monument Wash at sunset, in the high desert of the Arizona-New Mexico territories, was a place of fading fire. The land was all sharp angles and endless sky, a canvas of sandstone monuments that reached for a bruised purple ceiling. It was late autumn, somewhere between 1885 and 1890, and the air held the clean, sharp promise of cold to come. A smell rose from the earth, not of dust alone, but of yucca and sage, and the phantom scent of rain on parched red dirt, a memory of the last summer storm. Inside the coach, Nez Tsil Nez kept his own counsel. He sat facing backward, his rifle resting easy across his knees. He was a man made of the same silence as the canyons, his eyes watchful under the brim of a worn hat. He had hired on as guard for this last stretch, a short job for pay, but every mile brought him deeper into the country he knew, and closer to the places that haunted him. His face was weathered, calm, but for the story told on his throat. A pale, puckered scar looped under his left jaw, the brand of a rope, a near thing from bandits years ago. It tightened when the air was damp, a constant reminder. His thoughts were not on bandits today. His thoughts were on money. Money for sheep, the flock that had belonged to his family, scattered and sold off to pay debts he did not understand. Debts tied to paper and laws made in towns. His immediate purpose was that earn coin, buy back the wool, restore the hoofbeats to his mother's land. But beneath that purpose, like a river running underground, was the deeper one, the one that had pulled him from scouting jobs for the miners, from work he despised but endured. His sister, Ashki Yazi, gone 10 years, vanished from the grazing lands, taken, the whispers said, by raiders, or perhaps something worse, something that wore a smiling face and spoke of work in faraway towns. He searched for a trace of her in every new place, a flicker in a stranger's eye, a piece of silver in a pawn shop. He had been searching for a decade. He shifted, the movement economical, and his gaze brushed over the other passenger, a woman, alone. She had been quiet for the last 50 miles, which he respected. She was not made for this country. Her clothes, though dusty, were town-made. She sat clutching a heavy carpet bag on her lap as if it held the last water in the territory. Eliza Mayhew held the bag, and inside the bag, her fingers traced the outline of a book. It was a thick ledger, bound in scuffed leather. It did not belong to her. She was a seamstress by trade. Back in Kansas City, her needle had been her defense, her way of making things whole, a stitch in time. She had believed in that. Now, she was a temporary cook at the Sagebrush Cafe in Red Mesa, running from a past that had unraveled despite her best efforts. The ledger was the reason. She had taken it from the man who had ruined her sister, a smooth-talking banker in Kansas City. She had been hired for a short time as his secretary, and in her grief and anger, she had seen the book left open. She had taken it, a foolish, desperate act. It was filled with names and numbers, accounts of mysterious payments from a bank in Santa Fe, payments listed for security, for land surveys, and most chilling, for labor placements, contracts for women, destination listed only as northern mines. She had fled, hoping to find work, to disappear, and perhaps to find a way to use the book to bring justice to the man who had destroyed her sister's life and reputation. She suspected he was part of something vast and terrible, a network that moved people like cattle. The stage pulled into Red Mesa with a final sigh of exhausted springs. The town was a raw gash in the high desert. It was new, built on silver ore and speculation. A single dusty street, lined with false front buildings of raw lumber, huddled between grazing lands and the stark mesas. The railroad was coming, the talk said. That promise hung over Red Mesa like a second sun, making men greedy, making the stakes higher. The rules here were thin, stretched brittle like old leather. Nez knew this. He stepped down from the coach, his boots sinking into the fine red powder that passed for a street. He saw it all in one slow look. The tension was thick enough to taste. The new mine headframe, skeletal against the sky. The saloons, already loud. And the simmering conflict, the one that defined life here, the Crowther outfit. Silas Crowther ran cattle, thousands of head, and he claimed the water. All of it. His reach extended from the wells to the grazing lands the Dine had used for generations. Nez unhooked the mailbag and slung it over his shoulder, his payment for the ride. He saw Sheriff Tully leaning against a post, a man whose practicality was a form of surrender. Tully nodded, a shallow dip of his chin. He feared upsetting the balance of power, and in Red Mesa, Silas Crowther was the power. Eliza stepped down, her legs unsteady. She pulled her shawl tight, the wind whipping a strand of brown hair across her face. She looked toward the Sagebrush Cafe, its sign creaking on its hinges. As she walked, her bag heavy in her hand, she passed Ortega's Mercantile. Abel Ortega himself was outside, a man with kind eyes and a welcoming word for everyone, sweeping the boardwalk clear of the day's dust. He tipped his hat to her. She saw, further down, the small adobe sanctuary run by Sister Magdalena, a place of quiet refuge for women who had nowhere else to turn. At the end of the street, the telegraph office was a small, important box. Thomas Gray, the operator, emerged, his movements quick, his eyes seeming to be everywhere at once. He was the nerve ending of the town, the one who heard the whispers from Santa Fe and beyond before anyone else. Nez moved toward the Mercantile, counting the coin in his hand. Under his shirt, he felt the weight of the nausea, the crescent-shaped silver pendant his mother had worn. It was his bond to his people, a promise of protection, a reminder of the family he had to restore. He thought of his sister, Ashki, and the small turquoise bead she had always carried. Eliza reached the cafe. She pushed open the door, the smell of stale coffee and fried fat washing over her. She was safe. For now. She went to the small room she was given in the back, and only then did she set down the bag. Her sewing kit was beside it. She took out a needle, its steel cool and familiar in her hand. A tool for mending, a tool for making things right. She looked at the ledger. She did not know how to fix this. Not yet. The talk in the cafe that evening was all of Crowther. He had bought the last free well, the one near the Dine grazing lands. He had hired more riders, men with hard eyes and new rifles. A rumor, passed by a freighter, spoke of a silent partner in Santa Fe, someone powerful. Someone directing Crowther's land grabs through coded messages sent by telegraph. Eliza served stew to miners, her hands shaking slightly. She watched the faces, listened to the talk. She thought about the names in the ledger. She thought about her own sister. And then she saw them. 2 women, sitting in a corner booth. They were not from here. They looked tired, but their eyes held a desperate, misplaced hope. They spoke in low tones to a man she recognized as one of Crowther's foremen. He was smiling, talking about good work, a new life up north. Later that night, when Eliza went to clear the table, the women were gone. The foreman was gone. All that was left was a pair of empty coffee cups and the faint, sweet smell of cheap perfume. They had vanished, just like the others, just like the whispers. Nez stood outside the Mercantile, watching the moon rise over the red mesas. He heard a sound, faint on the wind, from the highlands beyond the town. The steady, rhythmic pulse of a drum. A ceremony, a prayer for balance, for healing, in a land that was falling out of it. He closed his eyes, the sound anchoring him. He had his own promise to keep. The sheep were the start. Ashki was the finish. He did not know that the woman in the cafe, the one with the sad eyes and the heavy bag, held the map to the darkness he was hunting. The town of Red Mesa settled into an uneasy quiet, the dust settling, the secrets hardening like stone. The wind had teeth. It came scouring out of the northeast, a solid wall of grit that turned the night blind. The Red Mesa mail coach, its lanterns throwing useless, panicked circles of light, fought every inch of the trail. The sandstorm had descended just after twilight, a shrieking phantom that erased the mesas and the stars. Every gust threatened to peel the canvas roof from the wagon. Inside, Eliza Mayhew had her eyes shut tight. It did not help. The grit found its way through the leather curtains, coating her eyelashes, her lips. It was a taste of the whole. Raw territory, abrasive, relentless, inescapable. She held the carpetbag on her lap with both arms, her knuckles white. The ledger inside felt like a block of lead, a weight that was dragging her down. Yet it was the only thing she had. She could feel the hard corners of the book through the worn fabric, the embossed seal of the Bank of New Arcadian, a name she had come to despise. She had spent the last 2 nights in her small room at the cafe, daring to study the contents. The entries were chilling in their simplicity, page after page of disbursements. Security payment, S. Crowther. Land acquisition fee, Red Mesa. And then the ones that made her stomach clench. Female labor contract, transport, Northern Mines. 3 names, 5 names, 2 names, each followed by a sum of money and a code. It was a cold accounting of lost souls, financed by the same Santa Fe bank whose interests her former employer in Kansas City had served so well. On the roof, riding shotgun. Nez Silnes did not shut his eyes. He wrapped a kerchief over his nose and mouth and let his vision narrow to the pale shapes of the lid horses. He had argued against this run. The driver, eager for the mail bonus, had insisted. Now they were paying for it. The wind howled, a high, thin sound like a mourning woman. They were approaching Cutthroat Bridge. The name was Apartment. It was a rickety timber span across a dry arroyo that became a raging, muddy river during the flash floods. Even in a storm like this, the dry wash below offered no shelter, only a 30-foot drop onto hard rock. Nez felt it before he saw it, a shift in the darkness ahead, a shape near the far abutment that was too solid, too still, to be a yucca stalk. The storm was loud, but his senses were tuned to a different frequency. He felt the waiting. He touched the driver's shoulder. "Pull up." "I cannot stop here," the driver shouted over the gale. "We will be blown over." "Stop!" Nez's voice was not loud, but it cut through the wind. The driver hauled on the reins, the horses protesting, the coach skidding, and the shadows moved. 2 riders, their faces masked by bandanas, burst from the near side of the wash. Not the far. They had used the storm as cover. A rifle flashed, the sound stolen by the wind, the bullet splintering the driver's boot heel. Eliza screamed as the coach lurched to a violent halt. She was thrown against the opposite seat. Nez did not wait. He was already moving, leveraging his weight against the guardrail, bringing his rifle to his shoulder. This was not a robbery. This was an ambush. They were not trying to stop the coach. They were trying to kill the driver. The first rider was close, raising a handgun. Nez fired. The man folded, a silent puppet whose strings had been cut, falling from his horse. The second rider, further back, saw his partner fall and wheeled his horse, firing a heavy shotgun. The blast pattern was wide, meant for maximum damage. Pellets ripped through the canvas side of the coach, inches from where Eliza was huddled. The driver screamed, not in pain, but in pure terror. He lashed the reins, and the team bolted. They lunged forward onto the bridge, a structure never meant for a panicked 6-horse team. Nez roared no, but it was too late. The horses hit the wooden span. Eliza felt a terrible, sinking lurch. a sound like a giant tree splitting apart. The lead horses made it across, but the coach's weight was too much. The main supports, weakened by dry rot and the relentless storm, snapped. The world turned upside down. Eliza was thrown free of her seat as the coach carriage tore loose from the front axle. She felt a moment of weightlessness, a chaos of splintering wood, sand, and the high, terrible screaming of the horses. Then she hit the sloping side of the arroyo and slid, tumbling into the darkness. Nez had grabbed for the iron rail as the coach went over. He hung for a second, his boots kicking at empty air, before he let go, dropping, bending his knees as he hit the sandy bottom. He was bruised, his shoulder aflame, but he was on his feet. The storm raged around him in the confines of the wash. The driver was gone, dragged away by the terrified, still harnessed lead team. The wreckage of the coach lay 10 yards away, a tangle of wood and leather. One of the wheel horses was down, its leg broken. "Eliza!" Nez shouted, his voice hoarse against the wind. He heard a moan. He moved toward the sound, his rifle ready. He found her crumpled near the base of the arroyo wall. She was conscious, gasping, her hands clawing at the sand. "My bag," she whispered, her voice frantic. "The bag, it is gone." "Are you hurt?" Nez ran his hands checking her arms, her legs. Nothing seemed broken. "The book," she sobbed, pushing him away, trying to stand. "I have lost the book." Nez scanned the darkness. The storm was a curtain. The second rider was gone, vanished back into the night. He had not pursued them. He had not stayed to rob the mail. He had only wanted the coach destroyed. "Stay here." Nez moved toward the wreckage. The downed horse whinnied, a sound of pure agony. He placed a single, merciful shot. The silence that followed was heavy. And in that silence, he saw it. The carpet bag. Its handle was snagged on a piece of broken harness, dangling just above the sand. He cut it free with his knife and brought it back to her. Eliza grabbed it, clutching it to her chest, her whole body shaking. She looked up at him, her face pale in the gloom, and the dam of her secrecy broke. "He tried to kill me," she whispered. "He did not want the mail. He wanted this." She touched the bag. "Who?" "I do not know. The man, the banker in Kansas City. The one I ran from." The words came tumbling out, carried by the wind. She told him everything, about her sister, about the job as a secretary, about the man's cruelty and the lies that had driven her sister to desperation and, finally, to disappear. "He said she ran off," Eliza choked out. "But I know he did something to her. I know it. And then I found this." She fumbled with the clasp, pulling the heavy ledger free. "He was part of it. He sends them. The bank in Santa Fe. They pay for it. They pay Crowther. They pay for contracts. For women. They send them to the mines up north. And they are never seen again. I took it. I took the book to prove what he did, to save them." Nez took the ledger from her hands. His face was unreadable. He turned his back to the wind, striking a match. He cupped the tiny flame, his large hands shielding it as he brought it close to the page Eliza had pointed to. His eyes moved over the spidery script. He saw the payments to Silas Crowther. He saw the lists of names, the destinations. And then he saw a line of text, a payment authorization for a northern escort. It was signed not with a name, but with a title. Coyote Buyer. The match burned down to his fingers, but Nez did not flinch. The name echoed in his mind. A cold, sharp poison. It was the name he had heard from a drunken freighter in Flagstaff, a name whispered among the dying when a girl went missing from the grazing lands, a name he had tied, in his own mind, to the day Ashki Yazi had vanished 10 years ago. This was not just her secret. This was his. The flicker of lanterns appeared on the rim of the arroyo. A voice called out, "Down there, I see them." Sheriff Tully and 3 men, their faces wrapped, picked their way down the slope. "What in blue blazes happened here?" Tully demanded. his lantern sweeping over the scene, the wrecked coach, the dead horse, the 2 survivors. "Ambush," Nez said, his voice flat. He had already tucked the ledger back into Eliza's bag, and she held it behind her. Tully's eyes found the body of the rider Nez had shot. He knelt beside it, pulling the bandana from the man's face. He was a stranger. No one Tully recognized. "Looks like petty robbery," the sheriff declared, standing up, brushing sand from his knees. "A highwayman. Got what he deserved?" "He was not alone," Nez said. "There was a second rider. He used a scattergun." Tully shrugged, his gaze dismissive. "Likely scared off when his partner fell. You are lucky. Miss Mayhew. Lucky he was a poor shot." He looked at her, his eyes lingering on her face, then on the bag she held. "This is rough country. A woman alone things can happen. It is best not to get tangled in affairs that are not your concern. Silas Crowther's affairs, for example. He runs this part of the territory." Eliza said nothing, her fear freezing the words in her throat. Tully grunted. "We will send a wagon for you both, and the mail. We will take this one back to town." He and his men lifted the body. "Just a common thief," he repeated, as if saying it twice would make it true. They left. Nez and Eliza were alone again in the screaming wind. Nez walked over to where the dead man had fallen. He knelt, ignoring the body, and studied the ground. He found what he was looking for, the wadding from the second rider's shotgun. He picked it up, sniffing it. He smelled the powder. It was new, government issue. The kind the army sold as surplus. The kind the big ranches bought by the crate. Not the reloaded shells a common bandit would use. He knew the bore, too. A 10 gauge. Crowther's foreman favored them. He stood up and walked back to Eliza. The storm had not lessened. They were 2 small figures in a vast, violent darkness. "He is right," Nez said, his voice quiet. "You should not be tangled in this." "I cannot stop," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Not after my sister, not after seeing those names." Nez looked at her, seeing for the first time the steel under the fear. He had his own sister to find, and the name, Coyote Buyer. This book was the first solid trace he had found in 10 years. He held out his hand, not for her, but for the bag. "Give it to me." She hesitated, her grip tightening. "I can keep it safer than you can," he said. "They were not shooting at me." She looked at his face, at the scar on his throat, at the calm, deep certainty in his eyes. She handed him the carpet bag. He did not open it. He slung the strap over his own shoulder, the weight of it settling against him, next to the nausea that lay under his shirt. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now," Nez said, turning his face toward the faint, distant lights of Red Mesa. "You go back to the cafe. You cook. You sew. You say nothing about this book. You say it was a robbery, just as the sheriff said. You keep your eyes open, and you keep your mouth shut. That is how you will stay alive. And you—" "I will hold the book," he said, "and I will find the second rider." They stood in silence, a pact made. He would keep the ledger. She would keep her life. And together, unknowingly, they held a secret that could tear Red Mesa apart. The next morning, the Sagebrush Cafe was a storm of noise and steam. The wreck at Cutthroat Bridge was the only topic. Miners, freighters, and ranch hands crowded the tables, all demanding coffee and answers. Eliza Mayhew moved through the haze, her body aching, her mind still replaying the lurch of the coach and the terrifying, flat report of the shotgun. She had not slept. Nez had vanished after they returned to town, taking the carpetbag with him. She was left alone with the secret, serving plates of eggs to men who saw her as nothing more than a new face. Thomas Gray, the telegraph operator, leaned against the counter, blocking her path to the kitchen. He was a man made of quick, nervous energy, his clothes too fine for Red Mesa. He smiled at her, a practiced, easy expression. He told her good morning. Miss Mayhew, he said it was a terrible thing. That accident. He was glad she was not harmed. He remarked that she was the prettiest sight in this dusty town, and a face like hers deserved better than a smoky cafe. Eliza tried to move past him, her patience thin. I am busy, Mr. Gray. He held up a hand, laughing. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his sleeve, as if performing a magic trick. He wanted to show her something. He said he was a man of many talents, not just a key tapper. He ran errands, he said, for important people. He unfolded a receipt. He boasted that it was for a delivery he made for the convent. A simple job. He said Sister Magdalena paid handsomely for discretion. Eliza glanced at the paper. It was a simple receipt for services rendered, but the signature at the bottom, Sister Magdalena, looked wrong. The loops were too elegant, the hand too steady. It was not the firm, practical script she had seen on the convent's charity postings. Tomas winked, tucking the paper away. He said the sisters had business all over the territory. He told her if she ever needed a message sent or received, she should come to him. He would take good care of her. He finally moved, and Eliza hurried into the kitchen. The image of the false signature burned into her mind. Later, she had to fetch flour from Ortega's mercantile. The air outside was sharp, the sky a clean, cold blue after the storm. Abel Ortega was stacking cans, his movements methodical. He greeted her with his usual quiet warmth, asking after her well-being. He said she had been through a frightening ordeal. His kindness made her stop. She leaned against the counter, the heavy flour sack in her arms. Abel paused, his eyes full of a worry that went beyond her. He lowered his voice, though the store was empty. Miss Mayhew, he said, this is a hard place. You seem like a good person. I feel I must warn you. He told her to be careful of the men from the Crowther outfit. He said he had heard stories. Terrible stories. It was about the debts. So many families were in debt to Crowther's store or his water rates. His foreman would visit them. They would offer a deal. The debt would be cleared. In exchange for labor. He said they always asked for the women, the daughters, the wives. They called it housekeeping work, or laundry jobs at the big ranches Crowther supplied up north. Far from Red Mesa. Abel shook his head, his gaze dropping to the worn floorboards. The families were desperate. They agreed. But the women, he said, his voice barely a whisper, they are never heard from again. No letters come back, no money is sent home. They are just gone. Eliza felt a cold sickness rise in her. It was true. The ledger was not just numbers. It was a list of the missing. She thanked Abel and hurried back to the cafe, the flour feeling as heavy as the secrets she carried. She found Nez that afternoon. He was not in the town. He was in the broken land just outside it, sitting among the yucca, mending a piece of harness. The carpet bag rested near his feet. She did not wait for greetings. She told him what Abel Ortega had said. Nez listened, his hands never ceasing their work. He had expected this. He had been studying the ledger for hours, hidden in the daylight. He looked up at her, his eyes dark. He told her it was worse than Abel knew. He opened the carpet bag and pulled out the ledger. He flipped past the pages of names and payments to a page near the end. It was a schedule. His finger, calloused and sure, tapped a line. He told her to read it. She read the words, her voice trembling. 3 people, to be delivered Thursday night, Hunting Lodge on Pinyon Ridge. This is it, Eliza said. This is proof. We can stop them. We have to go there. Nez was silent for a long moment. He looked toward the high, dark line of Pinyon Ridge. This was not his fight. He was dying. This was a white man's sickness. This trade in paper and people. His goal was sheep. His mission was his sister. Getting involved in this could cost him both. But the name, Coyote Buyer, the name that haunted his search for Ashki Yazi, the methods were the same. The disappearances were the same. He looked at Eliza, at the desperate, stubborn set of her jaw. He was a warrior, And this was a hunt. He could not turn away from a fresh trail, not when it smelled so strongly of the one he had lost. He nodded slowly. When Eliza returned to the cafe, a package was waiting for her on the kitchen counter. It was a thick envelope, postmarked Santa Fe. Her name was written on it in sharp, black ink. She took it to her small room, her heart hammering. She broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter. It was not a letter. It was an accusation. It named her Eliza Mayhew as a thief. It accused her of removing a private ledger from the office of her employer in Kansas City. It demanded the immediate return of the property. It warned her, in cold, legal language, that the authorities in the territory had been notified of her location and her crime. Her blood ran cold. But it was the wax seal on the envelope that truly terrified her. It was a cross, the symbol of the local convent. They knew where she was. They knew who she was, and they were using the church to threaten her. She ran from the cafe, the letter clutched in her hand, all the way to the small adobe sanctuary. She found Sister Magdalena in the courtyard, sorting dried herbs. Eliza was out of breath. She could barely speak. She held out the letter. She showed her the envelope. The seal. Sister Magdalena took it, her face, usually so serene, hardened. She examined the seal in the bright sunlight. She shook her head. "This is not our seal," she said, her voice firm. "The cross is similar, but the words are wrong." She pointed to the paper. "And I would never sign a letter like this. We are here to offer sanctuary, not to deliver threats. That is the work of the law, not of God." She looked at Eliza, her eyes sharp. "Someone is trying to frighten you, child. Someone who hides behind the shield of the church." Sister Magdalena walked to the small kitchen fire, held the letter and the envelope over the flames, and did not let go until they were black ash. "This," she said, "is a lie, and that is what we do with lies." Eliza watched it burn. The fear did not vanish, but something else rose to meet it, a cold, hard anger. She walked back to the sagebrush, her mind racing, trying to piece it together. The fake receipt from Thomas Gray, the fake letter from Santa Fe. It was all a web of deceit. A man was waiting for her by the door to her room. He was dressed in a suit that was too loud for the desert, a derby hat tilted on his head. He smiled, but the expression did not reach his eyes. He introduced himself as Eddie Pike. He said he was the new manager for the boarding rooms, acting on behalf of the owner in Santa Fe. Eliza was confused. She paid her rent to the cafe owner. Mr. Pike shook his head, making a tisking sound. The boarding rights had been sold. He had the paperwork. He informed her that her rent was, in fact, overdue. He needed payment for the month, in cash, immediately. He was smooth, his voice reasonable. He showed her a receipt, already filled out. Eliza was tired. She was disoriented from the letter, from the threats. She just wanted this new problem to go away. She went into her room, took the last of her savings from her sewing box, and paid him. It was almost everything she had. He counted the money, smiled again, and handed her the receipt. He tipped his hat, wished her a good day, and sauntered off toward the saloon. Eliza looked at the receipt in her hand. The paper felt cheap. The signature was a meaningless scribble. A cold dread washed over her. Nez found her standing there moments later. He had come to tell her his plan for Thursday. He saw her face. The color drained from it. He saw the piece of paper in her trembling hand. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low. She told him. The new manager, the rent, the money. Nez took the receipt from her. He looked at it for 1 second, then snorted. A rare, sharp sound of contempt. He crumpled it in his fist. "There is no new manager," he said. "That is Eddie Pike. He is a con man. He follows the mining camps." Eliza felt a wave of hot, deep shame. She, who held the evidence of a vast, evil conspiracy, had been cheated of her last dollar by a common trick, A fake receipt. It was a cruel mirror of her life. She was a fool. Nez did not say a word. He turned and walked out of the cafe. He found Eddie Pike in the nearest saloon, already at the bar, a bottle in front of him. The saloon was quiet. Nez walked up behind him. He did not speak. He did not draw his weapon. He took Pike by the collar with one hand and the back of his belt with the other. He lifted the man bodily off the floor, carried him outside, and pressed him hard against the wooden watering trough. Pike's face was inches from the scummy water. "The money," Nez said. Pike gasped, his bravado gone. He clawed the bills from his pocket and shoved them into Nez's hand. Nez dropped him into the dust. Pike scrambled to his feet, sputtering curses, and hurried away. Sheriff Tully emerged from the office of the sheriff across the street. He had watched the entire exchange from his window. "That man," Nez said, nodding toward Pike's retreating figure, "stole from Miss Mayhew. He used a false receipt." Sheriff Tully adjusted his gun belt. He looked at Nez, then at the saloon, then at Eliza, who had followed Nez into the street. "Did you get the money back?" he asked. Nez nodded. "Then it sounds like the problem is solved," Tully said. He turned to go back inside. Eliza stepped forward, her anger overcoming her fear. "What about the crime? He cheated me." "He lied." Tully stopped, his hand on the doorknob. He looked at her, his face a mask of weary practicality. "Miss Mayhew," he said, "I'm investigating a destroyed mail coach. I have a dead body in my back room. I have 6 payroll guards in that saloon who are about to start shooting at each other. I simply do not have time for a squabble over room rent that has already been settled." "But he is a criminal," Eliza protested. The sheriff sighed. "Besides," he said, "a man like Silas Crowther pays nearly half the taxes in this town. His money pays for this badge. His money keeps Red Mesa from blowing away. I have to pick my battles. A small-time cheat is not a battle I have time to fight." He went into his office and shut the door. Eliza and Nez stood alone in the street. The wind moved the red dust in swirls around their boots. She looked at the closed door of the sheriff. She looked at the saloon. She looked at the high, distant mesa. "There is no law here," she said, her voice hollow. "Not for people like us." Nez looked at her, his face as still as the stone monuments. He held out the money Pike had stolen. He was right about one thing. Nez said, "We have to pick our battles." He nodded toward the distant ridge. "That one." Eliza looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face. The con man, the fake letter, the sheriff's cold calculation, it all clicked into place. They were not separate problems. They were all part of the same machine. She did not take the money. She pushed his hand back toward him. "You keep it," she said, "for supplies." She met his gaze, her own now as hard as his. "Thursday night?" Nez nodded once, a silent agreement. He put the money in his pocket. He turned and walked toward the livery, the dust rising behind him. The path was set. Nez understood that this required a different kind of preparation. He led Eliza out of Red Mesa, not toward the town, but away from it, into the high country that was his true home. He took her to the hogan of his aunt, a woman named Anne. The structure was round, built of earth and juniper logs, its single doorway facing the rising sun. It seemed to grow from the red soil, and a profound quiet settled around it. Eliza paused at the entrance, uncertain. This was his world, not hers. Nez spoke to his aunt in the low, flowing sounds of the Dine language. The old woman, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, looked at Eliza. Her eyes were not unkind, but they were deep, and they seemed to see everything. She nodded once and motioned for them to enter. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of wood smoke and herbs. Anne did not offer mysteries or magic. She offered focus. She took a small bundle of dried cedar needles and lit them from the coals of her fire. A plume of clean, sharp smoke rose. She held the smoking branch out, first fanning the smoke over Nez, and then over Eliza, her lips moving in a quiet chant. Nez spoke, his voice low. He explained that she was clearing their minds. She was asking the holy people to grant them clear sight, to let them see the truth that hides in shadows, and to protect them not just from bullets, but from deception. Eliza closed her eyes and let the smoke wash over her. It was a strange comfort. The tension that had lived in her shoulders since Kansas City seemed to ease. Just for a moment, they were given fry bread and hot, bitter coffee. They ate in silence. Anne's advice, when it came, was simple. Nez translated. She said to watch the wind, for it carries warnings, and to trust the heart, for it knows the sound of a lie. They left as the sun was high, the air warm. As they walked back toward the ridge, Nez stopped by a patch of soft dirt. He pointed. Eliza looked, but she saw only dust. He told her to look again. He crouched, his finger tracing the air above the print. He explained this was a shod horse, moving fast. The print was deep at the toe, shallow at the heel. He moved to another spot, showing her a muddled series of tracks. This, he said, was a man on foot, carrying a heavy burden, his right foot dragging. He was teaching her to see the land not as empty space, but as a story. She tried. She knelt, her eyes scanning the ground. She began to see the small disturbances she had never noticed before: the broken twig, the overturned pebble, the scrape of a boot heel. He stopped again, his entire body going still. He motioned for her to be quiet. He knelt by a clear boot print, preserved in the hardened mud near a dried wash. He told her to look at the sole. It was new, with a pattern of horizontal bars. He explained it was Army issue, government surplus. Silas Crowther, he said, bought surplus equipment by the wagon load for his men, the men who had attacked the coach, the men who guarded his interests. This was not a guess. This was a fact, written in the earth. Back in Red Mesa, others were moving, too. The small network of decent people was stirring. Sister Magdalena, her face set in a look of profound determination, opened the doors of her small sanctuary to 2 more women. They had drifted into town, their faces bruised, their eyes hollow with a fear that had no name. She did not ask them for their stories. She knew. She gave them soup, a clean bed, and a solid lock for their door. She was building a refuge, one small, safe space at a time. At the Mercantile, Abel Ortega was busy selling tobacco to a freight driver. The driver was talkative, glad to have an audience. He spoke of a strange party of men he had passed on the trail from Nevada. They were not miners or cowboys. They looked, he said, like high-stakes gamblers, with expensive suits and hard eyes. They had plenty of money and had asked for the quickest route to Crowther's private hunting lodge on Pinyon Ridge. Abel listened, his face pleasant, his mind carefully filing away every word. As the afternoon shadows grew long, Nez and Eliza skirted a small, informal gathering of dine families. They had come together to share food and to dance. A single drum set a low, steady pulse that felt like the heartbeat of the land itself. A singer's voice rose, a high, clear song of healing and resilience. It was not a spectacle for outsiders. It was life. Children laughed as they chased a lean, happy dog. Women stirred pots of stew over open fires, the smell of roasted mutton and chili mixing with the scent of pine. Men spoke quietly, their faces turned toward the setting sun. Eliza watched as an elder man saw Nez. The man's face broke into a warm smile. He came and placed a hand on Nez's shoulder, speaking in their language. Eliza could not understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was one of deep, quiet respect, of shared loss and shared strength. She saw the humility in the way Nez bowed his head, the way he answered. He was not the lone, silent warrior she had first seen. He was a son, a brother, a part of this, and she understood. Suddenly, what he was truly fighting for. It was not just his sister. It was all of this. Thursday night came. The air was bitingly cold. the sky so clear the stars looked like chips of ice. Pinon Ridge was a dark, silent mass against the heavens. Nez led her up a steep game trail, his feet making no sound on the rock. He moved like a shadow, a part of the darkness itself. Eliza struggled to keep up, her leg aching, her lungs burning in the thin air. He found their spot. It was a high cleft in the rock, a natural blind screened by a dead juniper. It smelled of pine and cold stone. From here, they could look down on the hunting lodge. It was a long, solid building of dark timber, all its windows glowing a dull, ominous yellow. They waited. The cold was a physical thing, seeping into their bones. Eliza clamped her jaw to keep her teeth from chattering. Just before midnight, they heard it, the crunch of hooves on gravel. Riders. 4 men on horseback emerged from the trees, leading 3 other horses. Women were slumped in the saddles of the leady animals, their hands tied to the pommels. They were herded into the pool of light from the lodge doorway. They were young. One woman, a girl really, stumbled as a foreman pulled her roughly from the horse. The moonlight flashed on a piece of silver at her throat. It was a simple, hammered crescent, an amulet. Nez stopped breathing. It was not the exact one his sister had worn, but it was from his family's clan. He knew the maker's mark. A terrible, suffocating rage filled his throat. The lodge door opened wide. Silas Crowther stepped out, a cigar glowing like a hot coal in his hand. He was a large man, his shadow stretching vast and black across the ground. He looked at the women with the flat, assessing gaze of a man buying livestock. He rumbled something to his foreman, who laughed. A different voice came from the darkness of the doorway. It was smooth, calm, and educated. It held no trace of the desert, no accent of the frontier. The man himself stayed hidden. The voice, polite and chilling, spoke of the Blue Canyon contract. It confirmed the number. It stated that the payment was ready. This was him, the coyote buyer, the voice that signed the ledger. Nez's hand moved, fast as a snake, to the knife at his belt. He took a single, silent breath, his body tensing, gathering itself to spring. He was outnumbered 10-1, but the white-hot fury in him did not care. Eliza saw it. She saw the tremor of rage that ran through his shoulders. She saw the killing intent in the set of his jaw. She reached out and put her small, cold hand on his forearm. It was a simple, grounding touch. She did not speak. She did not need to. The touch was a silent plea, a reminder, proof. They were here for proof, not for vengeance. They were here to save them, not to die. Nez let the breath out, a long, shuddering sigh. The rage did not go away, but he contained it. He forced his hand to relax. He stayed, watching, his mind cold and sharp again. He memorized everything. The faces of the foremen, the number of men, the brands on the horses, and the password, Blue Canyon contract. They waited until the men had gone back inside, until the women had been pushed into a dark outbuilding, until a single guard was left patrolling. Then they pulled back, melting into the shadows. They moved quickly down the far side of the ridge. Eliza, trying to hurry over the loose rock, put her foot wrong. A small stone was dislodged. It skittered down the slope, rattling in the silence. A shout rose from below. A lie. They had been heard. A rifle cracked, the sound shockingly loud in the night air. The bullet whined off the rock face, sending stone chips stinging past Eliza's head. Nez grabbed her hand. He yelled at her to run. They plunged down the dark side of the ridge, abandoning stealth for speed. Hoofbeats sounded behind them, the guards mounting up, fanning out to cut them off. Nez did not run for the open desert. He ran straight toward a solid wall of black rock. He pulled her toward a narrow crack, a fissure in the sandstone barely wide enough for a person to pass, a slot canyon. As soon as they were inside, the air changed. It was still cold and smelled of wet sand. Nez stopped, pulling her close. He tilted his head, listening. Above the sound of their own gasping breaths, he heard it. A low, distant rumble, like thunder trapped underground. He sniffed the air. Rain, far away, on the high mesas. A storm had broken. He told her they had to move, and they had to move now. A flash flood was coming. They scrambled through the twisting, narrow passage. The walls were smooth, curved like sculpted clay. The rumbling grew louder, a vibration they could feel in their chests. Behind them, they heard the shouts of the guards, the men frustrated, blocked by the narrow entrance. The first wave of water hit them. It was not a tall wall, but a churning, icy surge that rose to their knees in seconds. It pulled at their legs, making the sandy bottom slick and treacherous. The canyon twisted sharply, opening into a small, dark chamber. A sheer drop of 10 feet blocked their path. Below it, a pool of black water was already churning, spinning in a vicious, muddy circle. Nez did not hesitate. He slid over the edge, dropping into the waist-deep torrent. He found his footing on the unstable bottom and turned, holding his arms up for Eliza. He shouted for her to jump. She was terrified. The water roared. The sound was deafening. She tried to lower herself, her fingers scrabbling for a grip on the wet, smooth stone. She slipped. She did not fall into his arms. She fell sideways, her body striking the canyon wall with a sickening thud. A sharp cry of pain was torn from her throat. The current grabbed her instantly. It spun her around and pulled her toward the center of the pool, toward a dark, bubbling vortex where the water was being sucked under the rock with terrifying force. Nez lunged. He threw himself forward, deeper into the churning water, his hand shooting out. He caught her by the wrist. The force of the river was unbelievable. It tried to rip her from his grasp. He braced his legs against the unseen bottom, his boots slipping on the slick rock. His arm felt as if it were being torn from its socket. He was holding her entire weight, and the weight of the flood. Their eyes met. In the thundering darkness, lit only by a sliver of starlight from the narrow strip of sky far above, he saw her terror. She was not fighting him. She was holding on to him, her other hand gripping his arm, her fingers digging into his skin, even as the flood tried to claim her. He roared, a wordless sound of defiance against the water, against the men, against the fate that had tried to steal her. He felt the pulse of the river, a momentary lull in its power, and he heaved. He pulled her free. He dragged her through the churning water, fighting the current, moving toward the far wall. He found a small ledge, a tiny outcrop of stone just above the main force of the flood. He shoved her up onto it and scrambled up beside her. They collapsed together. They were soaked to the bone, shivering violently, gasping for air. The main body of the flood tore past them, a solid, thundering river of mud and debris, filling the canyon where they had just been. The guards were cut off, far behind them. They were trapped on the ledge until the water receded, but they were alive. They had trusted each other with their lives, and they had survived. They limped back to Red Mesa under a pale, watery dawn, their clothes stiff with dried mud, their bodies bruised. The flood had receded by sunrise, leaving a scar of wet, dark sand in the canyon. They spoke little, the shared ordeal a heavy silence between them. They entered the town separately, two ghosts slipping back into the world, carrying a terrible new knowledge. Red Mesa was buzzing. The near disaster at Cutthroat Bridge was already old news, replaced by a fresh, more exciting topic. Hand-painted signs had appeared in front of the saloon and the mercantile. Silas Crowther, in an act of stunning public generosity, was sponsoring a grand ball. The event was a fundraiser. The signs proclaimed, to build a proper infirmary for the town. Everyone was invited. The ball was to be held the following night at the new, still empty railroad depot. It was a masterstroke of public relations, a way for Crowther to paint himself as the town's benefactor while his men were trafficking people on the ridge above. Eliza cleaned herself as best she could, her hands shaking as she stitched a tear in her skirt. The simple act of mending a comfort, the memory of the churning water, of Nez's hand gripping her wrist, was a physical weight. Later that day, she sought out Sister Magdalena. She did not tell her about the night on the ridge, but she brought the scorched, threatening letter from Santa Fe. They sat in the quiet adobe sanctuary, the scent of cedar and dust in the air. Sister Magdalena put on a pair of small, wire-framed spectacles and studied the paper again, holding it to the light. She pointed to the signature at the bottom. It was a single word, matron. The sister shook her head. A small, definitive motion. We do not use this title. We have a Mother Superior in Santa Fe, but in our correspondence, we sign as sister, or, in formal Spanish documents, matrona. Never this. This is an English word, used by a man who thinks he is clever, but who does not know our ways. The forgery was confirmed. It was not just a threat. It was a clumsy one, designed to frighten a lone woman, but it revealed a crucial flaw. The enemy was arrogant. He underestimated those he tried to control. Nez, meantime, was not resting. He was watching. He spent the day in the shadows of Red Mesa, a silent observer. His focus was the telegraph office. He saw Thomas Gray emerge midday, not in his usual work clothes, but in a new checked suit and polished boots. He saw him enter the saloon and order a bottle of expensive whiskey, paying with a crisp bill. This was not the pay of a telegraph operator. This was blood money, the price of silence and coded messages. Later, when Gray was busy at the saloon, Nez slipped into the alley behind the telegraph office. The back window was unlatched, an oversight of a man made careless by easy money. Nez did not enter. He simply watched from the shadows. He saw the tidy desk, the telegraph key, and on a shelf below, a small, wooden box. Inside it, nestled in velvet, was a heavy brass seal. It was not the post office stamp. It was a custom seal, and though he could not read the engraving from that distance, he knew it was the tool used to create the false convent seal. Thomas Gray was not just a messenger. He was a forger, a key part of the deception. They met that evening in the back room of Ortega's Mercantile. The three of them, Nez, Eliza, and Abel Ortega. The air smelled of coffee beans and cured leather. Nez spoke first. Thomas Gray is the one. He sends the messages. He makes the fake seals. Eliza nodded. And the ball is the distraction. The buyers from Nevada are already here. Crowther is entertaining them, making the deal look like a celebration. The real transaction will happen tomorrow. Abel Ortega, his face grim, added his part. The men from Nevada, they are staying at the saloon. They are asking about the Blue Canyon cutoff. They plan to ride out tomorrow evening. Eliza looked at them, a plan forming in her mind, born of the con man's trick she had fallen for. Deception had to be met with deception. She said she had an idea. It was dangerous. But Thomas Gray was arrogant. He was proud of his new wealth, and he had tried to flatter her. Perhaps, she suggested, he would be foolish enough to boast to the right person. The plan was set. The ball was the key. The next night, the railroad depot was transformed. Lanterns hung from the raw timber beams, casting a warm, festive glow. A trio of fiddlers sawed away in a corner, their music thin but cheerful against the vastness of the high desert night. The entire town was there. Miners in scrubbed clean shirts, ranchers with their wives, even Sheriff Tully looking uncomfortable in a string tie. Silas Crowther was the center of it all. He moved through the crowd, a large, looming presence, handing out free whiskey and smiling, accepting thanks for his grand gesture. He made a short, booming speech about the future, about progress, about Red Mesa becoming the jewel of the territory. All thanks, he implied, to his foresight and investment. Nez was not inside. He stood across the dusty street, his shoulders resting against a porch post, his hat pulled low, He was watching the depot, watching the men posted at the doors, watching the horses tied at the rail. He was a guardian, his stillness a counterpoint to the raucous music. The depot doors opened, and Eliza Mayhew stepped out onto the porch. She had done her best. She had restitched her one good dress, a dark blue wool, and washed her hair, tying it back with a simple ribbon. She was not a wealthy investor from the East. She was just a woman, trying to find a breath of clean, cold air, her face pale in the lantern light. The wind stirred, pulling strands of her hair free, whipping her skirts around her ankles. She looked tired and lost, and altogether too fine for a place this rough. Nez watched her for a long moment. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she gripped the porch rail. He pushed himself away from the post, his spurs making no sound in the thick dust. He crossed the street. He stopped a few feet from her, not wanting to startle her. She looked up as his shadow fell over her. He touched the brim of his hat, a slow, respectful gesture. The music from the party washed over them, a strange soundtrack to the quiet desert night. "Can I walk you home, miss?" His voice was low, the words unexpected. It was the title scene, the line spoken not by a charming suitor, but by a quiet warrior, an offer not of romance, but of protection, of understanding. Eliza looked at his face, at the scar on his throat illuminated by the spill of yellow light. She nodded. They did not go to the cafe. Not yet. They walked down the main street, away from the noise, past the dark mercantile, past the silent telegraph office. The moon was high, flooding the red landscape with silver. They walked slowly. For the first time, they spoke. Not of the plan, not of the danger, but of themselves. Eliza spoke of Kansas City, of her sister, not the one who had disappeared, but the one whose reputation had been ruined by the banker. She spoke of the shame, the injustice, the crushing weight of lies. She explained that she had come west not just to run, but to find a place where her needle, her work, could make her whole again, where she could earn back the dignity that had been stolen from her family. Nez listened, and then he spoke. He told her about Ashki Yazi. He spoke her name aloud, a name he had held in his heart for 10 years. He told her of the day she was gone, the stillness of the grazing lands. The flock scattered, the single silver bead he had found near the spring. He told her of his vow, not for revenge, but for restoration, to find her, to bring her home, to make his family whole again, just as she wished to make hers. They were two people, defined by what they had lost, walking together through a silent, dusty town. He stopped, and she stopped with him. He looked at her, his eyes unreadable in the moonlight, but she felt the warmth from him. He had seen her terror in the canyon. She had seen his rage on the ridge. There was nothing left to hide. Hesitantly, his hand, calloused from reins and rope, found hers. Her fingers were small, but her grip was firm. They stood like that for a long moment. He leaned in. It was not a passionate kiss, but something far more profound. It was a careful, tentative press of his lips to hers, a sealing of the pact, a promise of shared burdens. It was brief and quiet, and it changed everything. The walk back to the cafe took a very long time. After he left her at her door, the night's work began. Thomas Gray, flush with whiskey and Crowther's praise, left the ball early. He moved quickly, a small, dark shape, carrying a heavy leather satchel. He did not go to his office. He went to the railroad depot warehouse, a vast, dark building at the end of the tracks. Nez and Abel Ortega, who had left the party moments after, followed him. They stayed in the deep shadows of the lumber piles, watching. Eliza, meantime, had not gone to her room. She had slipped, unseen, into the telegraph office. She had spent an hour that afternoon cleaning the office for Tomas, a favor for which he had paid her a coin. During that hour, Her quick, observant eyes had memorized the code chart he kept tacked to the wall, the one he used for private, coded transmissions. Now, she sat in the dark, silent office. She heard the click and chatter of the main line, but she was waiting for something else. A moment later, a different key began to sound. A private line. Thomas, sending his report from the warehouse. Her fingers, nimble from a lifetime of sewing, flew across a piece of paper, marking the dots and dashes, the short and long pulses. It was a message to Santa Fe. Confirmation. Blue Canyon contract secured. Payment received. Delivery tomorrow. At the warehouse, Thomas Gray did not wait long. A single rider emerged from the darkness. He was not Crowther. He was not one of Crowther's men. He was a pale man in a town suit, a man Nez recognized instantly. He was the assistant clerk from the county courthouse, the law itself. The clerk took the satchel of money from Gray. He spoke only a few words, his voice too low to carry. The transaction was complete. The judiciary was bought. Nez and Abel faded back into the night, their knowledge a cold, hard weight. Nez did not go back to town. He circled the warehouse, his senses on fire. He was looking for anything, a track, a sign. He found it under a small, twisted pinyon tree near the back of the building. The dirt was disturbed, as if someone had knelt there, digging briefly. He knelt, his fingers probing the soft soil. His hand closed around a small, metal object. He pulled it out. It was a small, silver amulet, a dragonfly. It was tarnished, and the chain was broken, but he knew it. He knew the hammer marks. He knew the small turquoise chip set as the eye. He had made it himself, 15 years ago. It was the charm he had given to Ashki Yazi, the one she wore with the silver bead. She had been here. She had been in that warehouse. The realization hit him like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole his breath. This was not a cold trail anymore. This was her. He closed his hand around the charm, the metal cutting into his palm, and in the darkness, he finally let the rage come. The dragonfly charm felt small and cold in the palm of Nez, but it burned like a hot coal. His rage from the night before had settled, cooled into something far more dangerous. It was a focused, patient thing, a cold point of steel in his chest. He, Eliza, and Abel Ortega met in the gray light of dawn. Huddled in the back room of the mercantile, the smell of burlap and dried beans was thick in the air. On the table between them lay the open ledger. Beside it, Eliza had placed her careful, handwritten notes, the decoded telegraph messages from the night before. The pieces fit together like a death shroud. Eliza pointed to a name in the ledger, then to a corresponding code in her telegraph notes. It was clear. The buyers from Nevada, the ones Abel had seen, were named. The coded message confirmed their arrival and the purpose of their visit. The auction was not an auction at all. It was a simple sale, a final transaction, scheduled for this very afternoon at the hunting lodge in Blue Canyon. Eliza said they had it. They had the proof, the names, the bank, the payments, the schedule. It was everything. Nez looked up from the silver dragonfly. His voice was flat. He told her proof did not matter, not anymore. He reminded her about the courthouse clerk, the man who took the money from Thomas Gray. The law was bought. The ledger would be called a forgery. The telegraph messages lies. Sheriff Tully would call it a rumor. They would be arrested, or worse, and the proof would be burned. He closed his hand around the charm. He said he was not going to Blue Canyon for proof. He was going for his sister, Abel Ortega, who had been silent, his face etched with worry, nodded slowly. He said this was a sickness in the town, a shadow that had grown too long. It had to be cut out. He told them he knew two young Dine shepherds. Their names were Hosteen and Claw. They were good men, brave men, whose own families had lost grazing land and water to the men of Crowther. They would ride. Eliza looked at Abel, then at Nez. She said they needed more. They needed someone to care for the women when they were freed. She would go to Sister Magdalena. Nez nodded. He said he knew one more. A man named Liang. He worked in the silver mine, in the deep, dangerous tunnels where the air was bad. Liang was Chinese, and the foreman treated his people with contempt, but it was Liang they trusted with the blasting powder. He was a man of great precision, who spoke little and saw much. Nez said Liang would know how to make a new door, or how to close an old one. First, they went to the office of the sheriff. Eliza refused to go without giving the law one final chance to be the law. They found Sheriff Tully at his desk, drinking coffee that smelled stale and burned. Eliza did not hesitate. She laid her decoded telegraph message on his desk. She told him what they had seen at Pinyon Ridge. She told him about the women held in the shed. She told him about the Nevada buyers and the sale that was happening this afternoon. She told him 5 women were going to be sold and transported, and that they would never be seen again. Sheriff Tully did not touch the paper. He sat back, his chair groaning. He looked old and tired and cornered. He got up and paced to the window, looking out at the dusty street, at the town he was paid to protect. He turned back, his face a mask of pained compromise. He told her she did not understand the burdens of his office. He said Silas Crowther had come to him, just this morning, after the ball. The rancher had made an offer, a new steam pump for the town well, a deed, signed and legal, for a new spring, guaranteeing free water for every citizen in Red Mesa. Eliza stared at him, her face pale with disbelief. Tully went on, his voice low, avoiding her eyes. All Crowther asked, he said, was for the town to respect his privacy, to not interfere with his labor contracts, which he insisted were perfectly legal. Eliza asked him what free water was worth when it was paid for with the lives of women. Tully slammed his hand on the desk. He told her he was responsible for the survival of the whole town. He could not start a war, a shooting war, against the most powerful man in the territory based on a stolen book and some coded messages. He said he would not commit. He would not send his men. He looked at them, his eyes hard. He told them he could not help them, and he warned them, as sheriff, to stay out of it. Nez had been silent by the door, his hand resting on the dragonfly charm in his pocket. He spoke, his voice quiet, but it filled the small room. He told the sheriff that some things were worse than a war. He said that some things are the war, whether you choose to fight or not. They left the sheriff standing by his window and walked back into the clear, bright sunlight, which now felt cold and mocking. They rode out of Red Mesa an hour later, a small, grim company. There were 7 of them, Nez and Eliza, Abel Ortega, the 2 young shepherds, Hosteen and Kla, their faces still, their rifles resting easy in their hands. Sister Magdalena, her black skirts tucked, riding a sturdy mule as if she had been born to it, a heavy bag of bandages and medicines strapped behind her, and Liang, the miner, a small, quiet man on a donkey, his own oilcloth satchel balanced in front of him. They did not take the main trail. Nez led them through a series of winding arroyos and canyons, a path known only to the Dine. The sky had turned a flat, metallic gray. The wind began to rise. Not a storm, but a steady, mournful sound that whipped sand into their faces. The land itself seemed to be testing them, the air full of dust and a sense of foreboding. They were forced to stop at a narrow pass. A rock slide, old and tightly packed, blocked the direct route. Going around would cost them hours they did not have. Liang slid off his donkey. He calmly walked to the face of the rock slide, studying it. He returned to his satchel and pulled out a single, waxed stick of blasting powder, a cap and a long coil of green fuse. He showed them to Nez. His English was careful, precise. He said this was a slow-burning fuse. Very good. You light it, you have 10 minutes, maybe 12. Enough time to walk away. He said it was good for making a path, or for closing a path behind you. He smiled, a thin, rare expression. He tucked the explosive carefully back into his bag. He said he had brought 3. He set his charge with quick, expert hands. They all pulled back, taking cover behind a rock outcrop. Liang lit the fuse, the spark bright in the gloom, then walked calmly to join them. They waited. The sound, when it came, was not a sharp crack, but a deep, satisfying boom that shook the ground. The rock slide shifted, a river of stone pouring into the canyon floor. A path was clear. They reached the ridge above Blue Canyon as the sun was beginning its long, slow slide into evening. The wind was stronger here, moaning through the pine trees. Dust devils, like angry red spirits, danced in the canyon below. The hunting lodge was lit, every window blazing, a defiant rectangle of light in the vast, gathering darkness. Nez did not let the others approach. He, Hosteen, and Claw slipped away, vanishing into the rocks and trees. They returned an hour later, materializing from the shadows as silently as they had left. The news was bad. Nez reported that there were 6 guards on the perimeter, 2 on the roof of the lodge, and at least 4 more inside with Crowther. They were heavily armed. They all crept forward to the vantage point Nez and Eliza had used before, the cleft in the rock overlooking the lodge. Below them, the scene was laid out like a dark play. The men from Nevada were on the porch, their expensive suits dark shapes in the lantern light. They were smoking cigars, their laughter loud and harsh on the wind. The main door of the lodge opened. A man stepped out, framed in the yellow light. He was not large like Crowther. He was of medium height, dressed in a fine, dark suit that spoke of Santa Fe or someplace further. He moved with a smooth, confident energy. He spoke to the Nevada men, his voice carrying clearly on the wind, educated and precise. He thanked them for their business. He assured them the assets were prepared and ready for transport. It was the voice from the shadows. The coyote buyer. He was not a ghost. He was a man, a well-dressed agent, standing on the porch, finalizing his purchase. As if on cue, the foreman of Crowther opened the door to the wooden shed, the outbuilding where the women were kept. They pushed the women out into the yard, lining them up. There were the 3 they had seen before, and 2 others, 5 women, their heads down, their hands bound. Abel raised a small spyglass. Scanning the scene, he cursed, his voice thick. Eliza took the glass from him, her hands shaking. She saw the women, saw the men from Nevada walking down the steps to inspect them, their faces appallingly casual. She felt a wave of sickness so profound she nearly dropped the glass. Nez took it from her. His hand was rock solid. He raised the spyglass to his eye. He scanned the line of women. The first, a young girl, crying silently. The second, defiant, spitting at the ground near a foreman's boot. The third, the one with the Dine amulet, her face blank. The fourth, a thin woman who looked ill. And then the 5th. She stood at the end of the line, slightly apart. She was older, her hair, thick and black and streaked with gray, hung unbound. She was not crying. She was not defiant. She was just still, with a terrible, absolute stillness, as if she were a stone. She was looking up, not at the men, but past them, at the dark ridge, at the free, open sky. The moonlight caught her face. The spyglass wavered. The world in the small lens blurred. Nez's breath caught in his throat, a sharp, ragged gasp. It was her, Ashki Yazi. 10 years of brutality and survival had been carved into her features. Her eyes were not the laughing eyes of his memory. They were hardened, worn down, as calloused as a laborer's hands. But it was her. She was alive. And as she turned her head, he saw it, glinting in the light, the small silver dragonfly amulet at her throat. A sound tore from him, a low, grieving roar trapped in his chest. His hand flew to his rifle. He was rising, his body acting before his mind, propelled by 10 years of loss and a white-hot, singular need. Eliza saw his face, contorted in the moonlight, a mask of agony and killing rage. She knew this time a touch was not enough. She put her hand on his chest, pushing him back hard against the rock. Her voice cut through his red haze. Not a whisper, but a sharp, clear command. She told him they would bring her home. They would bring them all home, but not this way. She told him to look at the guards, at the rifles on the roof. An attack now would be a massacre. She told him they were here to save them, not to watch them die. Proof first, then release. They had to use their minds, not just their fury. Nez looked at her, his eyes wild. He looked down at the lodge, at his sister. A ghost returned to him. He slowly let his breath out. The rage did not leave. It settled, focusing, hardening into a plan. He nodded. They set to work in the shadows, while the buyers and Crowther moved back inside the lodge to finalize their deal. Hosteen and Kla, moving with the silence of owls, slipped down the slope, stringing thin wires with small bells across the main trail leading east. Abel took the spare horses, leading them far down into a hidden draw, a staging point for their escape. Sister Magdalena found a sheltered spot behind a cluster of boulders, laying out her bandages, her medicines, her canteens of water, a makeshift hospital, waiting in the darkness. Crowther's foreman shoved the women back into the wooden shed. They locked the heavy wooden bar across the door and posted 2 guards outside it. Nez crept closer. He moved down the slope until he was on a ledge of rock directly overlooking the main lodge. The curtains were drawn, but one was old, its fabric torn. He had a narrow, perfect view of the room inside. He saw it all. He saw the heavy oak table. He saw the coyote buyer stack bars of gold on it. He saw Silas Crowther sign a stack of papers. He saw the coyote buyer countersign them. He heard their voices, muffled but clear enough. He heard the name of the Nevada Mining Corporation. He heard the name of the Bank of New Arcadian. He heard the final price, $50,000 in gold, for 5 renewable contracts. He heard the coyote buyer say he would ride at dawn with his new property. He heard Crowther promise an escort to the canyon mouth. The deal was done. The proof was absolute. Nez crawled back to the others in the dark. The wind was colder now, the dust thicker. He told them what he had seen. They would wait. They would wait until the hour before dawn. The hour when the whiskey had finished its work, when the guards were cold and tired and their senses were dull. That, he said, was when they would strike. The hours before dawn were a frozen, silent eternity. The wind had died, leaving a cold so profound it felt like the absence of life. The fires in the lodge had burned down to embers. The sounds of rough laughter and drunken celebration long since faded into a snoring quiet. Nez lay on the ridge, the cold of the rock seeping into him. He held the small silver dragonfly in his hand, its shape a familiar comfort, its reality a fresh, agonizing wound. His sister was alive, 50 yards away, a prisoner. Eliza lay beside him, her shivering so violent it was almost audible. She was not a warrior. She was a seamstress, but she was here, and she had not broken. Beside them, Liang, the miner, was perfectly still, his eyes on the lodge, a man of infinite patience. Nez looked at him. He nodded once. Liang slipped away into the darkness, moving east, toward the far flank of the compound where the horses were kept. He carried one of his waxed powder sticks and a short fuse. They waited. Nez counted his breaths. He watched the 2 guards outside the women's shed. They were pacing, stamping their feet, their rifles slung, their collars turned up. A muffled boom, sharp and sudden, echoed from the far side of the ridge. It was not loud enough to be a full-scale attack, but it was enough to shatter the stillness. It sounded like a rock slide, or a poorly set hunting trap. Shouts rose from the lodge. A light appeared. One of the guards at the shed cursed, looking toward the sound. A foreman yelled from the porch, telling them to check the horse line. The two guards looked at each other, then moved off at a jog, their boots crunching on the gravel, disappearing around the lodge. This was it. Nez moved. He was not a man. He was a shadow detaching itself from the rock. He flowed down the incline, silent, his knife in his hand. He reached the shed door. It was barred by a heavy 2x4 dropped into iron brackets. He put his shoulder to it, but it was solid. He slid his knife into the small gap, trying to find leverage, but it was not enough. A shape appeared beside him. Liang, he had circled back, his diversion a success. He handed Nez a short, heavy steel pry bar. Nez wedged it between the bar and the bracket. He put his entire weight on it. The wood groaned, a high screaming sound in the night. Inside the lodge, a man shouted. A dog barked. Nez ignored it. He heaved again. The iron bracket ripped free from the wall with a splintering crack. The bar fell. He pulled the door open. It was black inside, the air thick with the smell of straw and fear. Ashki, his voice was a bare whisper. A shape rose from the floor. His sister. He saw the faint outline of her face, the glint of her eyes. She moved toward him. She did not make a sound. She put her hand on his chest, and for a moment, 10 years collapsed. He saw the tears shining on her face. He grabbed her arm to pull her out, but she resisted. She held up a hand, a sharp gesture. Stop! She pointed into the darkest corner of the shed. Nez squinted, his eyes adjusting. He saw another woman huddled in the straw, her arms wrapped around a small, still bundle. A child? A baby. Sleeping. Ashki's eyes met his. Her meaning was clear. They could not run. They could not make a sound. The child would cry. The rescue had just failed. And then, a new sound. A horse, approaching at a fast walk. A single rider. Eliza, who was keeping watch near the lodge corner, flattened herself against the wall. A man rode into the yard, dismounting with the casual air of an invited guest. It was Thomas Gray. He was carrying a leather satchel. He was here, in the hour before dawn, to deliver the final coded messages and payments to the coyote buyer, his part in the transaction complete. He adjusted his new suit, brushed dust from his shoulder, and walked straight toward the lodge. He was 10 feet from Eliza when he saw her. His face, arrogant and pleased, froze. His mouth opened. Miss Mayhew, what in the... He was about to yell. He knew instantly that her presence meant disaster. Eliza moved faster than he could have imagined. She did not scream or run. She lunged, not at him, but at the satchel in his hand. She ripped it from his grasp. She was not the target. The proof was... She hissed his name. Thomas, you are a dead man. She dragged him, stumbling, back into the shadows, toward a small tool shed where Liang had reappeared. Thomas, utterly bewildered, found himself shoved into the dark space. Liang was there, blocking the door. In one hand, he held his last stick of powder. In the other, a coil of fuse. What is this? Thomas stammered. His bravado gone. What is happening? Eliza held up the satchel. She knew what was inside. Carbon copies of his transmissions, the code book, the last link. She told him he was a fool. She said they knew everything. The bank, the names, the sales. She stepped close, her face inches from his, her voice a cold whisper. You are going to help us, Thomas, or you are going to be a terrible, tragic accident. This whole lodge is full of Crowther's blasting supplies. It would be a shame if a spark found its way to them. Liang, his face impassive, calmly draped the green fuse over Thomas Gray's shoulder, letting it rest against his neck. Thomas began to shake, his eyes wide with terror. He looked at the powder, at Eliza's relentless face. What do you want? The lodge, Eliza said. Crowther has a private telegraph line. You are going to get us inside, and you are going to send a message." To whom he whispered, "To the federal marshal in Albuquerque, to the Santa Fe newspaper. You are going to send them everything. The names, the bank, the Blue Canyon contract. You are going to tell them that Silas Crowther and an agent from the Bank of New Arcadian are at this lodge, right now, with 5 stolen women." Tomas stared, his mind collapsing. This was impossible. He told her they would kill him. Eliza said she would kill him first. She gave him the choice. Help her, and maybe the marshal would see him as a witness. Refuse, and he would be nothing but ash. Tomas looked at the fuse. He nodded. His entire body sagged. He would do it. The lodge was still. The diversion had been forgotten. The shouting died down. The 3 of them moved like ghosts. Tomas led them to a back door, a pantry, and into the main room. It was empty, stale with cigar smoke and spilled whiskey. They found the office, a small, dark room with a desk, and on the desk, a brass telegraph key. Tomas sat, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the key. Eliza stood over him, the carbon copies from his own satchel in her hand. "Send this," she ordered. He began to tap. The sound was tiny, a metallic click, click, click in the vast silence. It felt as loud as a hammer blow. He sent the emergency call. He identified himself, and then, reading from his own damning notes, he began to transmit. He sent the names. He sent the bank. He sent the location. He sent the words Blue Canyon contract. A sound came from the hallway, a heavy, drunken footstep. A foreman, his shirt undone, appeared in the doorway. He squinted into the dark, his hand on his pistol. What in the blazes? He saw Tomas. He saw Eliza. His eyes went wide. Alarm. He raised his pistol. Liang moved, striking the man's arm with the pry bar. The shot went wild, thundering into the ceiling, raining plaster down on them. The lodge exploded. Shouts, running boots, the metallic click of rifles being levered. Crowther's voice roared above it all. "Find them!" Eliza, Tomas, and Liang ran, bolting from the office, back toward the pantry. They burst out into the yard just as Nez was trying to move the women from the shed. The compound was flooded with light as men lit lanterns, their faces pale and furious. They were surrounded. And then a new voice cut through the chaos, a voice of authority. "Crowther, stand down." A shot rang out, not at them, but into the air, on the ridge above. Silhouetted against the pale, pre-dawn sky, sat Sheriff Tully and his 2 deputies. Eliza stared, her heart stopping. He had come. Tully shouted, his voice carrying in the cold air. "It is over. Silas, the marshal's office in Albuquerque just wired me. They have the whole story. They have the bank. They have the contracts. They are writing." For a moment, there was a terrible silence. Crowther stood on the porch, a massive, dark shape, his face unreadable. Then he laughed, a low, ugly sound. He told the sheriff he was a fool. He said the marshal was 2 days away. He told his men to kill them all. The world erupted into gunfire, and the sky opened, as if in judgment. A sudden, violent storm of ice began to fall. Hailstones, hard as bullets, pounded the ground. The men, the roofs. It was chaos. Men were yelling, slipping on the ice, firing at shadows. Nez saw a foreman level his rifle at the shed door, where Sister Magdalena was now pulling the women out. Nez fired from his hip. His shot was true. It struck the foreman's rifle, spinning it from his grasp. Abel Ortega and the 2 Dine shepherds, Hosteen and Kla, opened fire from the rocks above, their shots pinning down the guards on the roof. Eliza saw 2 men rushing them from the side. She grabbed a heavy oil lantern from the porch wall and hurled it at their feet. The glass shattered. The oil ignited with a whoosh, a wall of fire springing up, cutting them off. Nez was at the shed. Now he yelled. He grabbed the small, sleeping child from the terrified woman, bundling the small form against his chest. Ashki, his sister, was no longer a victim. She grabbed the other women, her voice sharp. To the rocks, move! Sister Magdalena led them, her black skirts flying, scrambling toward the draw where Abel had the horses. Abel himself stayed behind, his rifle cracking, covering their retreat. They were almost there, almost at the dark fissure in the rocks that led to safety. A horse thundered out of the darkness, cutting them off. It was the coyote buyer, the man from the bank. His face was a mask of cold fury. His investment, his entire operation, turning to ash. He raised his pistol. He did not aim at Nez. He aimed at Eliza, the one who had started it all. Nez saw it. He shouted her name. He threw himself sideways, shoving her with all his strength. Eliza tumbled, falling hard onto the icy rocks. Nez took the bullet. The impact was a massive, stunning blow to his chest, throwing him back against the canyon wall. He felt a sharp, metallic crack, a searing pain, and then nothing. He slid to the ground. Eliza screamed his name. The coyote buyer tried to aim again, but a shot from Abel's rifle, and another from Tully's, struck the rock above his head, sending fragments stinging his face. His horse reared, terrified, and the man wheeled it, vanishing into the driving hail. Eliza scrambled to Nez. He was on the ground, his eyes closed. She put her hands on his chest, expecting to feel the warm rush of blood. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He gasped for air, his hand weakly going to his shirt. He pulled his hand away. It was clean. He reached inside his torn shirt and fumbled, pulling out the Naja, his mother's silver necklace. It was ruined. A deep, ugly groove was carved across the crescent. The silver warped and bent, but it had held. It had stopped the bullet. It had saved his life. Ashki was at his side, helping him up. He was bruised, his ribs on fire, but he was alive. Abel's voice called from the darkness. This way, hurry! The hailstorm was turning to a driving, icy rain. Lightning split the sky, a brilliant, terrifying flash. In its light, Eliza saw the path down into the deep canyon, toward Monument Wash, and in the flash, she also saw, far above them, the furious, hate-filled face of Silas Crowther, trapped on the ridge, watching them escape. The night was a long fall into a cold, dark river. They moved through the remnants of the hailstorm, the ground slick with ice, the air clinging to their skin like a wet shroud. Nez walked with a burning fire in his chest. The Naja had stopped the bullet, but the force of the impact had been like a hammer blow. Every breath was a sharp, searing pain, and the old, puckered scar on his throat felt tight, as if the rope were still there, a phantom memory of a past death reaching for a new one. Eliza walked beside him. She had tried to offer him a bandage, but there was no blood, only a deep, spreading bruise. She was numb, moving by sheer will, her mind replaying the sight of the pistol, the orange flash, the way Nez had thrown himself in front of her. He had not hesitated. He had simply acted. A shield of flesh and bone and silver. Sister Magdalena moved among the small group of rescued women, her voice low and calm, a prayer in the darkness. She had given the smallest woman her own mule to ride. The child, a little boy, was awake now, but not crying. He was wrapped in a dry blanket from Abel's pack, his eyes wide and dark, watching the world with a silent, profound shock. Ashki, Nez's sister, moved with a purpose that was both fierce and weary. She helped the other women, her presence a silent, solid anchor. She had survived 10 years in the dark, and she was not going to fall in the last few miles. Abel Ortega and the 2 young shepherds, Hosteen and Kla, scouted the flanks, their rifles ready. Sheriff Tully and his 2 deputies, grim-faced and quiet, covered their rear. They were a small, ragged army of survivors, united by the gunfire, moving through a land that offered no comfort. Dawn came not as a light, but as a slow, painful dilution of the darkness. A cold, gray mist hung in the air, revealing a world of wet stone and sodden earth. The sky was the color of old ash. They reached the mouth of the canyon and saw it. Cutthroat Bridge. It spanned the arroyo where the mail coach had been destroyed, the place where Eliza's secrets and Nez's hunt had first collided. The bridge was their only path back to Red Mesa, their only way across the deep, rocky wash. It was the beginning, and it would be the end. Nez stopped. He held up a hand. The group halted behind him. The air was too still. He listened, his head tilted. He heard it, the chink of a bridle, the sound of a shod hoof on rock. It was not behind them. It was ahead, on the far side of the bridge. He looked back. Tully and his deputies had heard it too, pulling their horses around, their rifles coming up. The sound was behind them now, as well. A low, steady drumming of many riders. Silas Crowther's voice, huge and full of rage, boomed from the mist ahead. He had them. Crowther and a dozen of his men rode into view, blocking the far side of the bridge. They were a solid wall of men and horses. At the same moment, the rear guard, another 10 riders, thundered up the canyon, trapping the small group on the narrow bank. It was a pincer, perfectly executed. They were caught, with a 30-foot drop of the arroyo on one side and no cover. Crowther dismounted. He walked to the edge of the bridge, a heavy shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. His face, visible in the gray light, was a mask of cold. Satisfied fury. He had lost the battle, but he would win this war. He looked at Sheriff Tully. He called him a traitor. He said he had offered him water, a future. He said he had chosen poorly. Sheriff Tully raised his hand slowly, a gesture of surrender, but his eyes were not on Crowther. They were on the ridge above Crowther's men. He lifted a small, silver whistle to his lips. The sound was shockingly high and clear, a single, piercing note that cut through the heavy air. For a moment, nothing happened. Crowther laughed. He thought it was a desperate, foolish signal. Then, from the high rocks behind Crowther, a new line of riders appeared. They were not ranch hands. They were dark, lean men, their movements economical and precise. They wore the coats of federal marshals. They had ridden all night, spurred on by the frantic, desperate telegraph message. A man at their lead, his face like carved granite, raised his rifle. He shouted, his voice a hammer. "Silas Crowther, by the authority of the United States Marshal Service. You and your men are under arrest for kidnapping and conspiracy." The trap had reversed. Crowther's men, caught between the marshals and Tully's small group, hesitated, their hands frozen on their weapons. But Crowther was a cornered animal, and that was when he was most dangerous. He was standing not 10 feet from Eliza, who had been near the front, before anyone could react. He lunged. He grabbed her, yanking her back against his massive chest. He pressed the twin muzzles of the shotgun to her head. The world stopped. Crowther yelled for everyone to back off. He shouted at the marshals, at Tully, at everyone. He said he wanted clear passage. He said to let him ride, or the woman would be the first to die. Eliza was rigid, her eyes wide with terror. She could feel the cold metal against her skin. Nez stepped forward. He lowered his rifle to the ground, kicking it away. His hands were raised, open. He was in agony, his chest a solid wall of pain, but his voice was clear. He called to Crowther. He told him to let her go. She was not the one he wanted. He told him to take him instead. He was the one who had tracked him. He was the one who had found the proof. He was the one who carried the ledger. He tapped the heavy leather satchel still slung over his shoulder. Crowther looked at him, at the dying man who had unraveled his entire empire. He saw the pain Nez was in, saw the way he favored his chest. He laughed, a deep, ugly, arrogant sound. He said Nez was worth nothing. He was just a dead man walking. The woman, he said, was his shield. But the world was moving again. In the moment of the standoff, 2 people had vanished. Ashki, Nez's sister, had faded back, her bare feet making no sound on the rocks. She had seen one of Crowther's supply wagons, pulled up near the bridge abutment. It was loaded with supplies for the chase, and on it, a cask of whiskey. Jostled in the hard ride, had sprung a leak. A dark, potent stain was spreading on the wagon bed. Ashki moved toward it, pulling a small flint and steel from the pouch at her belt. She was a survivor. She knew how to make fire. At the same moment, Liang, the miner, had slipped under the bridge. He had his last stick of blasting powder. He had his slow fuse. He was a man of precision. He knew the weak points of any structure. Ashki struck the steel. A small shower of sparks. One caught the dry wood. A tiny, hungry flame licked at the puddle of spilled alcohol. With a sound like a giant's roar, the wagon exploded. A ball of blue and orange flame erupted, engulfing the rear guard of Crowther's men. Horses screamed and reared. Men were thrown, their clothes on fire. It was chaos. And in that precise, deafening moment of distraction, the bridge itself heaved. Liang's charge detonated. It was not a huge explosion, but a perfect one. It tore the central supports from the far side of the span, with a groan of tortured timber. The entire far half of Cutthroat Bridge tore loose and collapsed into the arroyo below. Taking 3 of Crowther's men with it, the path was cut. Crowther was trapped on the near side with only 2 of his foremen, the marshals on the ridge, and his enemies in front of him. The blast threw everyone to the ground. Dust and splinters filled the air. Crowther was stunned, his ears ringing, his balance lost. His grip on Eliza loosened for a single heartbeat. It was all Nez needed. He did not lunge to kill. He lunged to save. He threw himself forward, ignoring the fire in his ribs. He grabbed Crowther's right arm, the one holding the shotgun. He twisted, using the man's own weight against him, turning the muzzles of the gun toward the sky. Sheriff Tully, his hesitation gone, his duty clear, fired his revolver. The shot was true. It hit Crowther in the shoulder. The rancher screamed, a sound of pure pain, and the shotgun discharged harmlessly into the gray mist. Crowther crumpled to his knees, his face white, his fight finally over. As he fell, the coyote buyer, the agent from the bank, who had been standing beside him, made a break for the rocks. He did not get 2 steps. The lead marshal and 2 of his deputies were on him, tackling him to the ground, pinning his arms. A deputy snapped handcuffs onto his wrists. He told the agent he was under arrest for human trafficking and conspiracy. The fight was over. It had lasted less than a minute. Eliza stumbled back, her hand at her throat, gasping for air. She was free. She was alive. She turned and saw Nez. The adrenaline had fled. The pain, which he had held back, returned in a devastating black wave. He sank to his knees, his body finally surrendering to the trauma. Eliza rushed to him, kneeling in the mud, holding him, supporting his weight. She was terrified he had been shot again. He gasped, his head hanging. He fumbled inside his torn shirt, his fingers closing around the ruined piece of silver. He pulled it out. The naja was bent almost in half. The turquoise stone shattered, a deep, ugly lead scar carved into its face. He looked at it, then at her. He said it had paid its debt. The marshals were securing the prisoners. Crowther was being bandaged by one of Tully's men, his face a mask of silent, simmering hatred. The coyote buyer, his fine suit covered in mud, was being searched. The women, protected by Sister Magdalena, were safe, huddled by the rock wall. Abel Ortega picked up Nez's rifle. Liang emerged from under the bridge, his face calm, as if he had just finished a day's work. Ashki walked across the remaining, stable half of the bridge. Her face was still, But her eyes, the eyes that had been so hard and cold, were now full. She walked past the prisoners, past the marshals, and stopped in front of her brother. Nez looked up. He saw his sister, not the ghost of his memory, not the hardened victim in the prison shed. He saw Ashki. She knelt in front of him. She did not speak. She simply put her arms around him. Nez let go. He wrapped his own arms around her, burying his face in her shoulder, his hand still clutching the broken silver. The 10 years, the long hunt, the pain, the rage. It all dissolved in that one silent embrace. It was a hug that was 10 years long. He was home. The gray morning mist that had shrouded the final confrontation at Cutthroat Bridge lingered over Red Mesa. A soft, quiet blanket over a town waking to a new reality. The joy was not loud. There were no shouts in the street, no celebratory gunfire. It was a measured, stunned relief, a collective loosening of a knot that had been tightening for years. The news had spread by dawn, carried by Tully's deputies and the returning members of the small rescue party. Crowther was in irons. The men from Nevada were captured. The bank agent from Santa Fe, the man they called the coyote buyer, was exposed. The shadow was broken. The federal marshals were efficient. They took the prisoners, including the pale and trembling Thomas Gray, and departed for Santa Fe before noon. The ledger and Eliza's translated telegraph messages went with them, now evidence in a federal case that promised to unravel a network of corruption stretching all the way from the territory capital to Kansas City. That evening, 2 gatherings were held. In the small adobe church, Sister Magdalena lit every candle she possessed. In a sheltered draw near the town's edge, the Dine families of Hosteen and Claw built a fire. The purpose of both was the same: gratitude. But then something new happened. Abel Ortega, his face weary but his eyes bright, walked from the church carrying a large pot of beans and smoked bacon. He walked to the Dine fire. He was followed by Sister Magdalena and Eliza, who carried loaves of fresh bread from the cafe. They offered the food. The Dine elders looked at them, a long, considering silence, and then they made space. Later, Hosteen and his father brought roasted mutton to the church, where the rescued women, the miners, and the townspeople were gathered. The 2 communities, separated for so long by suspicion and the hard lines of Crowther's fences, sat together. They shared a meal in the flickering light of candles and campfires, a quiet Thanksgiving. Ashki sat beside her brother, Nez, watching the faces. She did not speak, but she ate, a small, profound act of peace. The following day, the reckoning began. Sheriff Tully stood on the boardwalk in front of his office. He had called no formal meeting, but the town gathered. His face was gray, his eyes heavy. He spoke, his voice not loud, but clear in the still air. He did not make excuses. He told them he had been a coward. He admitted he had been tempted by Crowther's offer of free water, that he had tried to weigh the town's prosperity against the lives of a few. He said he had been wrong, and that his mistake had nearly cost them everything. He offered his badge to the town. Abel Ortega was the first to speak. He said the town did not need a new sheriff. It needed this one, the one who had finally made the right choice. A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. Tully kept his badge, but the weight of it, and his duty, had been reseated. His first act was to tear up the deeds Crowther had held. He declared the main well and the springs in the high country to be the public property of Red Mesa and all the people of the valley, for all time. He then proposed the creation of a town water board, its members to be elected, to ensure fair distribution. The town agreed. Abel Ortega was the first elected. He, in turn, nominated one of the Dine elders, a man of quiet wisdom. The motion passed. The monopoly was broken, not by law alone, but by a shared, public will. The work of healing was slow. Sister Magdalena's small sanctuary was now a true shelter. The 5 rescued women, along with 2 others who had fled Crowther's ranches in the chaos, were given a safe place to sleep. But they needed more than safety. They needed a future. Eliza Mayhew, her own past now settled, found her purpose. She went to the shelter, not with pity, but with bolts of cloth from Abel's store and her own sewing kit. She sat with the women, and she began to teach them. She showed them how to measure, to cut, to work the needle. They started with simple things, mending their own torn clothes. But soon they were making shirts for the miners, quilts for the coming winter. The cafe owner, seeing what she was doing, donated flour and supplies. Eliza and Sister Magdalena began to teach them how to bake bread in the convent's small adobe oven. Ashki joined them. She was still silent, her trauma a wall around her. But she brought wool. She sat on the floor, her hands sure and steady, showing the other women how to card and spin, how to turn the raw fleece into strong yarn. It was a quiet industry, a place where stitches and bread and wool were woven into new lives. Some, when they were strong enough, took the stagecoach east, their passage paid by a new town fund. Others, seeing a future here, chose to stay. The town was changing in other ways. Abel Ortega placed a large glass jar on his counter. He had painted a small sign on it, Red Mesa School Fund. He told his customers that the town's children needed to read, not just the children in the houses, but the children in the hogans. 2. The first coins in the jar came from the miners, the second from the dine shepherds. Liang, the miner, had been summoned by the mine superintendent. He had expected punishment for the explosions. Instead, he was offered a promotion. The superintendent, having heard the full story from Sheriff Tully, understood that Liang's precise work had saved the town, not endangered it. He was made the new safety foreman, tasked with making the deep, dangerous tunnels secure for all the men who worked them. Liang accepted with a simple, dignified nod. Weeks passed. The land healed from the storm, and the people with it. One clear, cold afternoon. Nez rode out from town. Ashki rode beside him. They did not speak. They rode east, toward the lands that had once been their families. They dismounted at the foot of a small hill, a place marked by a few low, respectful piles of stone. Their ancestors were buried here. They sat for a long time, the vast, silent sky above them. Nez reached into his shirt. He pulled out the naja. He had spent hours with a hammer and a piece of steel, carefully, patiently, straightening the bent silver. It was not the same. The crescent was flat, the surface marred by deep, ugly scratches and the scar from the bullet. The turquoise stone was gone, the setting empty. He held it out to Ashki. He told her it had saved him. She took it, her calloused fingers tracing the scarred metal. She looked at it, her eyes seeing not the damage, but the history. She told him their mother had not worn it for protection. She had worn it as a promise to hold the family, the land, the way of life, in balance. She handed it back to him. She said he had kept that promise. Nez looked at the ruined, remade piece of silver. It was no longer a charm against the past. It was a pledge to the future. He slipped the leather cord back over his head. When Eliza returned to the cafe that evening, a letter was waiting for her. The postmark was from Kansas City. Her hands trembled as she opened it in the privacy of her small room. It was from a law firm. She read the words, her eyes filling with tears. The banker, her former employer, had been indicted. The federal investigation, which had started with the coyote buyer in Santa Fe, had spread, uncovering the deep roots of the conspiracy. Her name had been mentioned in the bank's correspondence. The testimony she had given to the federal marshals, detailing her time as his secretary, had been used. She was no longer a fugitive, no longer accused of theft. Her name was cleared. The letter mentioned a small sum of money, to be wired to her as compensation for her wrongful dismissal. It was not a fortune, but it was justice. It was an end. She folded the letter. the paper crinkling in her steady hand. She was free. The following week, Nez began to work on the bridge, Cutthroat Bridge. It was a broken mouth, a symbol of the town's isolation. The wound had to be mended. He did not work alone. Liang came, with his knowledge of engineering and stress. Abel brought wagons of new timber, purchased with funds from the mine. Hosteen and Kla, and other men from their clan, came and worked alongside the miners and ranch hands who had once been their rivals. They were building something more than a bridge. Eliza came every day at noon, her wagon loaded with hot stew, fresh bread, and coffee. She watched Nez. He was not the same man she had met on the stagecoach. The restless, haunted anger was gone. In its place was a deep, quiet strength. He moved with purpose, his hands sure as he set the new beams. He was scarred, like the naja he wore, but he was whole. On the last day, they laid the final planks. The new bridge was wider, stronger, its timbers smelling of fresh-cut pine. It was not a place of ambush anymore. It was a solid, safe passage, connecting the town to the lands beyond. It was a promise, built of new wood, spanning the divide, strong enough for all of them to cross. Spring came to Red Mesa not in a rush of green, but in a slow, patient softening of the air. The wind, which had been a constant, abrasive force, gentled the sky, which had been a hard, metallic blue, deepened, and for the first time in memory, the smell of damp earth and budding sage was not undercut by the bitter tang of fear. The town was mending. The Sagebrush Cafe was the heart of this new life. It was no longer just a dim, smoky room smelling of stale coffee and fried meat. With the money from her compensation and a loan from the new town fund, Eliza Mayhew had built an addition, a new wing, made of fresh pine and bright. Wide windows stretched from the side of the old building. From one end of this new room came the constant, warm, intoxicating smell of baking bread. This was the bakery, run by two of the women Sister Magdalena had sheltered. They had discovered a gift for it, and their loaves, round and dark and crusty, were now bought by miners and ranchers alike. The other end of the room was a workshop. It was filled with the steady, rhythmic click of a new sewing machine, a gift from Abel Ortega. Here, the other women, the ones who had chosen to stay, turned out sturdy denim trousers, warm flannel shirts, and colorful, intricate quilts. It was a place of quiet, dignified industry. A new sign hung above the expanded porch, replacing the old, faded board. It was a masterpiece of wood and metal. Ashki Yazi, in the long, quiet months of her healing, had found her voice again. Not in words, but in her hands. She had carved the sign from a thick plank of juniper, and then, using tools and silver bought with her first earnings, she had meticulously hammered thin sheets of silver to inlay the letters. The silver caught the high desert light, shining. It read, "Simply Sagebrush Bakery and Mercantile." It was an evening in late April when the sign was finally hung. Nez and Abel lifted it, settling the heavy board into its iron brackets. Eliza stood on the boardwalk below, her hands clasped. Ashki stood apart, near the corner, her arms crossed. As the sign settled, she nodded once, a brief, sharp motion of profound, settled pride. The work was good. That night, Eliza finished her accounts. The ledger she kept now was her own. It was filled not with coded payments for lost souls, but with columns of figures for flour, yeast, thread, and wages paid. She closed the book, the day's work done. The cafe was quiet, the new rooms dark. She banked the fire in the kitchen stove, untied her apron, and hung it on its peg. She was tired, a deep, satisfying ache in her bones. She stepped out into the porch. The air was cool, carrying the scent of the distant pines and the sweet, clean smell of dust after a light, brief shower. The red earth had released its perfume. He was there. He was always there. Neztsil Knees was leaning against the porch rail, his gaze on the far, dark line of the mesas. He was not a hunter waiting in the shadows anymore. He was a man waiting for his life to begin. He turned as she came out. The lantern light from the window caught the silver of his scarred naja. He touched the brim of his hat. His voice was low, the same quiet rumble she had heard on the dark stagecoach, at the chaotic town ball, but this time the edges were soft. "Can I walk you home, miss?" Eliza smiled. The question was no longer a question. It was a promise. She said, her own voice quiet. "I believe you can, Mr. Silknees." They walked down the center of the street. The town was asleep, but it was a peaceful sleep. The lights in the windows of the houses seemed warmer. The silence was not empty. It was full. They did not talk of the past. The past was a story told, a debt paid. They spoke, as they always did, of the future. They spoke of things to be built. Nez spoke of the new bridge, solid and strong. He said the freight wagons were using it, and travelers, families in prairie schooners, were stopping in Red Mesa now that the water was clean and free. He said they needed a place, a proper guest house, not just the saloon rooms, a small hotel, he said, with clean beds and solid walls. Eliza nodded. She looked up at the band of stars, so bright they looked like spilled diamonds. A guest house would be good, she agreed, and a bathhouse, with hot water pumped from a new boiler. The miners deserve it. The travelers, too. She had been thinking, she said, about the town fund. There was still money in it. We need a public water station, right by the new well. A stone trough, deep and clean, for any traveler, any horse, any flock. No charge, no fences. Nez stopped walking. He looked at her, at the earnest, serious set of her face, and he saw the next 50 years. He saw the building of a life, the building of a town, one brick, one beam, one decent thought at a time. They were the same. They were both menders. They had reached the small cottage behind the church that Sister Magdalena had helped her rent. But they did not go to the door. They stood by the gate, under the vast, silent, open sky. He turned to her. In the starlight, she could see the healed scar on his throat, the scarred silver on his chest. He reached up, his hand calloused and warm, and touched her face, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. She reached up, her own hand covering his. She rested her fingers on the naja. It was no longer a shield. It was just a part of him. He did not kiss her. He leaned in slowly, respectfully, and rested his forehead against hers. It was a contact more intimate than any kiss. They stood like that for a long time, breathing the same cool, sage-scented air, their eyes closed. Two solitudes, two survivors, finally touching. His voice was a bare whisper, a vibration she felt more than heard. "Eliza, stay, build this with me." She let out a breath she felt she had been holding since Kansas City. Her own whisper was just as quiet, and just as sure. "I am already home." The desert night held them, two small, unmoving figures, their shared promise a silent, powerful thing under the immense, unblinking gaze of the stars. The world faded away, leaving only the dark, the scent of rain on the earth, and the simple, solid contact of their joined spirits. The next morning, the new life was in motion. In the workshop, Eliza and Ashki had a new class. 6 children, 3 from the town and 3 from the Dine Lands, sat around the big work table. Eliza stood before a large slate, a piece of chalk in her hand. She drew a large, clear letter. "This," she said, her voice bright, "is an A." The children copied it onto their own small slates. At the other end of the room, Ashki was showing 2 of the older girls how to measure and cut a piece of calico. She was not silent anymore. Her voice was low and patient, her instructions precise. They were teaching them to read, to write, to measure, to sew. They were giving them the tools of independence. Outside, just beyond the last house, Nez had his own class. He walked with a small group of boys, town and dine alike. He crouched, his finger pointing not at a slate, but at the earth itself. He told them to see. He pointed to a small, delicate track. This is a fox. He was not in a hurry. His tracks are straight, one foot in front of the other. He was hunting. He pointed to another, a muddled scrape. This is a man, walking west. He is limping. His right boot drags. He was teaching them to read the land, to respect the stories it told. He was teaching them to see. Eliza looked out the window of the workshop. She saw Nez crouched with the boys, his head bent, his hand gesturing to the ground. He looked up, as if he felt her gaze, and saw her at the window, surrounded by the children. Their eyes met across the distance. A slow, quiet smile spread across his face. She smiled back. The two life paths, the weaver and the warrior, the seamstress and the scout, had intersected. They were now one road. Later that week, the stagecoach, the one that now ran reliably over the new bridge, brought a letter. It was for Sheriff Tully. He opened it in the Mercantile, in front of Abel and Eliza. It was from the United States Marshal in Santa Fe. The letter was short, the words, "Final." The primary partner of the Bank of New Arcadian, the man who had funded the coyote buyer from his high office, had been found guilty. His assets were seized. The bank's charter was permanently revoked. The last paragraph was the most important. A portion of the seized funds. The letter read, had been granted by the federal court as restitution. The money was being wired to Red Mesa, to be placed in the Public Water and Reconstruction Fund. It was enough to build the guest house, the bathhouse, and the public watering trough, with more to spare. The town decided it needed a marker, not a statue, but a memory. They gathered, all of them, at the Cutthroat Bridge, which no one called by that name anymore. It was just the Red Mesa Bridge. It was a bright, clear afternoon. Abel Ortega, Sheriff Tully, Sister Magdalena, Liang, Ashki, Eliza, and Nez, the rescued women and the townspeople. Liang had affixed a small bronze plaque to the largest of the new support beams. Abel Ortega pulled a canvas cloth from it. The words were simple, carved deep, to last longer than any of them. Water free, women free, roads open. That evening, in the new Sagebrush Cafe, the lights were warm. The room was full. Miners and shepherds sat at the same table, sharing a loaf of fresh bread. In the corner, Ashki was showing a traveler a silver bracelet she had made. Just inside the door, on a thick wooden peg, hung the Naja. Nez had put it there that morning. It was not his to wear anymore. He had told Eliza, it did not belong to one man. It belonged to the house. It hung in the warm, yellow light. The silver was scarred. The setting was empty. The deep groove of the bullet was a dark line, a memory of violence. But it was not a charm against fear. It was not a shield. It was a foundation. It was the first, flawed, beautiful stone of a new home, a new family, a mark of the hard, bitter, and unbreakable freedom of the West. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We invite you to comment below and let us know where you are listening from, so we can all connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales. Like the video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.